One thing I did not mention last time is that in Islam has no priestly mediators. Now, most of the world's religions, they claim that their religion is so complex that only a person who has spent extensive time studying it can approach their God, or a person who's devoted himself, separated himself, become really holy. And these persons serve as mediators. Keep this in mind when we come to the next chapter. By the way, on Wednesday, we'll talk about Africa. One of the reasons that Islamic people had such a hard time converting Africans was Africans continually had priestly mediators. They sometimes called them shaman, witchmen, or whatever they called them. But they had priestly mediators, and they could not understand the concept of, hey, you mean everybody can go to Allah without going through a priest? Among Christianity, generally Catholic, Orthodox, and Roman Catholic, and Anglican do have priestly mediators. Most Protestant denominations have chosen to not have priests. They say that all believers are priests and all believers can go directly to God. Anyway, they don't have priestly mediators. Something else I didn't mention the other day is they do not eat pork. Now, this gambling thing is somewhat interesting. Officially, Islamic people are told not to engage in games of chance. That includes playing bridge, playing with rolling dice, and whatever. And yet they're notorious for running gambling casinos, supposedly to entice other people who are not Muslims to come to the gambling casino. And any of you who know anything about gambling, the house always wins. And most of the other people who go in lose, but the house is going to win. You know what I mean by the house, well, maybe you don't know, but the house wins. Most of the customers come out with pockets much, much flatter than they had when they came in. So anyway, they are notorious for running gambling casinos. Now, along the way, they added a few others that I'm going to mention here. One of them is they generally don't drink coffee because, again, Mohammed did not know about coffee, and also they don't smoke tobacco. And again, the reason this is not officially included is Mohammed did not know about tobacco. But when coffee and tobacco were introduced from the New World, some of their religious leaders got together and decided that their people should not drink coffee and should not smoke tobacco. Now again, folk, there's no religious group where you can say everybody keeps all the rules. Islam is no exception. Some of them do smoke and they become as addicted to it as anyone else. And some of them, of course, even drink alcohol. And the wealthier ones of them, especially, were notoriously bad for getting really, really drunken. Here's a problem, folk, with because you all know that alcohol is mind-altering. But if none of your ancestors drank for, let's say, hundreds of years, and you start, the chances are it's going to affect you far worse than it would perhaps if some of your ancestors had imbibed or drunk alcoholic beverage. And the result is, for some of them, when they start drinking after hundreds, maybe 1,000 years without it, some of them that it affects them far worse than it does people who have been exposed to it down through the generations. Now, something else, and this is, when they take over a place, they would promise the Christians and Jews, oh, you can remain Christian, you Jews can remain Jews, and the Christians would live in their own communities. But what they were not told was that there were a lot of restrictions placed on them. In most Muslim countries, Christians had to pay a special tax called a jizya. This was a tax that Muslims did not have to pay. And officially, the tax was to help support their armies. However, in actual reality, it was to help keep the Christians poorer than Muslims, who required Christians to pay a tax that Muslims did not have to pay. To distinguish between Christian and Muslim, they would allow Muslims to wear a tall cap In the case of Turkey, it's called the Turkish Fez. Christians were not allowed to wear headgear. You might ask, what about cold weather? And generally in their climates, it does not get cold enough for them to need a whole lot of headgear. But Muslims were allowed to wear headgear. The purpose of not allowing Christians and Jews to wear headgear was the headgear might make them appear taller than a Muslim. They wanted the Muslim men and women to be taller than Christians. On the same lines, Christians and Jews were not allowed to ride on the back of the beast, about the back of any beast, whether it be a camel or a donkey or a horse, because this would put them higher up off the ground, elevate them above Muslims. Yes?
Is that part of the tax?
The jizya is that's separate from the tax. But it's the same thing. There was restrictions. The point I'm trying to make is their countries have severely limited and restricted Christians down through the ages. And again, you could not ride the back of a beast because this would elevate you higher. Muslim houses were allowed to be a certain height, and Christian houses had to be lower. So you could tell a Muslim from a Christian, a Muslim's home from a Christian by the fact that the Christian's home was lower. The whole idea was to help guarantee the apparent superiority of Islam over any other religion, most notoriously Christianity and Jews. They called Christians and Jews people of the book. Now, folk, until a few years ago, professors, teachers who favored Islam, and yes, I had such a teacher when I was at University of Tennessee, they tried to talk about how tolerant and how lenient Islam was towards non-believers. The professor I had is long deceased now, but I kind of wonder what would he think if he could see what's going on in the world today. Toleration. The folk, it's difficult to imagine, to call them tolerant. Toleration seems to be a thing of the past for them. But they called them people of the book. In other words, people that we can accept and live alongside of and tolerate, but with one severe restriction. They were delegated or relegated to a lowly, inferior position and meant to stay there. Very similar to the way the Ku Klux Klan treated blacks back when they were allowed, when the Klan was able to. In other words, yes, we'll do business with you. Yes, we'll tolerate your presence, but we're going to make sure you stay in your place. I'm speaking from the viewpoint of the Klan, not from my personal viewpoint. I hope you understand. Same difference, same thing. And, oh yes, another thing, the conversions from one religion to another can only go one way. You can convert from Judaism and Christianity to Islam. The penalty for converting from Islam was death. This is still enforced in some places in the Islamic world. They kill persons who try to convert. Now, there was a case of an Afghanistan man who wanted to convert to Christianity, and he was under a death sentence. But Italy decided that, hey, we'll take you in. Italy is not as Christian as perhaps it once was, but nevertheless, they still have a Constitution. So Italy took him in and hid him away somewhere in Italy, and as far as I know, he's still there. I haven't heard anything from him since. But from time to time, you'll hear of a case. Now, ISIS is notorious for killing Christians. And you'll see videos from time to time of ISIS leading a bunch of Christians away to be either crucified, beheaded, whatever. Again, the persons who were once admirers of Islam, it's difficult for me to wonder what do they think of the present situation? What do they think about what's going on now? All right. Again, now about the issue of fire and sword. Your book tends to downplay it. To quote what your authors once said about the subject, that a lot of outsiders claim that Islam converts by fire and sword, But Islam denies that they convert a fire and sword. Now, I've had students from India and from the Balkan region here who can show me documentation where that Islam has, in fact, converted a fire and sword. Or at least they, from their point of view, it appears that way. Here's the catch-22 to that. That varies from one time to another time, from one place to another place. You cannot make a blanket statement about it. At times, Islamic rulers have been very tolerant, and at times they've been extremely hard on people of other faiths. This is true where they, in some cases, we know they forcibly converted Hindus from Hinduism to Islam by fire and sword. Here in the northern part of India, and in the Balkan region of Europe. I'm talking about Greece and Macedonia and these places in here. They are known to have forcibly converted a lot of people. And once converted, you and your descendants are expected to remain Islamic from now on forever. Now, about converting from Islam, the 20th and 21st centuries has had more converts from Islam than all the other centuries combined. And a lot of that is probably due to electronic means of getting or reaching these people's minds that was not in existence before. These people have access to computers, to the internet, to shortwave radio, and most of you might not know what shortwave radio is, but shortwave radio is radio waves that travels hundreds of miles. And until, well, 30, 40 years ago, most of the world's listening was done on shortwave radio. I don't know how true that is today. I mean, we Americans never listen to it, but we have thousands of local radio stations that we want to listen to radio, we do. But of course, today also there's satellite radio, which a lot of people now have in their cars. That comes almost standard on every new car. Maybe not all, but it can stand on a lot of new cars. You have to pay for it. But just, but you know, it was really a means of reaching, of getting a message of other religions to these people in this part of the world that once did not exist. And it is having an effect on them. And again, a lot of your Islamic people do not like it. Now, many years ago when I was at Lockheed, there was an older lady there who became a close friend of mine. I mean, she was old enough to be my mother. She was almost like a mother to me. And she would talk a lot. But I must say, I mean, she was liberal. And her point of view was, we have to learn how to negotiate with people who are enemies and negotiate a peace. And we got to, we must. All right, folk, she was not thinking of these kind of people. When dealing with the type of people I'm talking about, there is no negotiations with them. Now, in the case of the Jews, here's what the Arabs want. They want all Jews to be forced into the sea and drowned. Now, what do the Israelis negotiate? Well, let's work up a compromise. Maybe a compromise where half of us would be thrown into the sea and drowned, or maybe all of us would be half killed. Either all of us half killed, or can we work up any kind of compromise? I mean, I'm being facetious. I hope you understand. You cannot work up any kind of compromise with people like that. You cannot work up any kind of peace. Well, and she would show me a cartoon where everybody was dead except one person. This one person left open a gas canister, and whoop, there was a gas canister, and he perished also, and all humanity perished. Well, folks, we might all perish, but the fact is we cannot. We still cannot negotiate with these people. They kill each other more so than they kill persons who are not like themselves. And it was just during the class I held Wednesday morning, 5 days ago, that a big attack, terrorist attack was made in Tunisia. And then over the weekend, I mean, I believe the following day, another bigger, much bigger attack was made in Yemen. And probably within a week, there'll be another attack, and who knows where it might be. Folks, it could easily be right here in Atlanta. Nobody is immune. Nobody is safe. Do you have a comment?
There was a thing in a mosque not that long ago. Like you were talking about ISIS, like hating on Christians. Or they hate everybody, man. Like they blew up 100 some odd people in a mosque. It was interesting.
And Islamic mosques. Yeah, go ahead.
It was really interesting. The dude pulled the trigger right when they were saying death to Israel, death to America, which gives credence to ISIS being slightly created by the United States. Which, I mean, there's like a lot of weird evidence pointing to that. Like, so if you think about what their goal is, they don't want to form a state, otherwise they'd be doing things to form a state. They're not making friends with anybody, they're pissing everybody off, which is uniting the Middle East against a common enemy. And now the Middle East needs help because they don't really have a military. So who are they going to turn to? They're going to start trying to get in with the United Nations. And who is the biggest supporter of the United Nations? Just because we have the most to give, the United States. So it's weird how that kind of works out. It's just that, like, to look at the entire picture, it's a weird thing.
You're almost on the border of getting into conspiracy theories.
Almost.
And folks, I mean, I heard a talk show, man, just yesterday. I was driving home. And I heard talking about, I don't believe any conspiracy theory. I got thinking, well, hey, it's the basic nature of human beings to conspire. The basic nature. So, are there conspiracies? I'm convinced right now. Who's the conspirators? I don't know. And where are they conspiring at? I don't know. But a whole lot of the craziness that goes on just simply cannot be explained any other way than by somebody under the table trying to manipulate things. I mean, we know that communism was a worldwide conspiracy. Nazism was a conspiracy. People conspired. So yeah, you're getting close to the idea of conspiracy. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if the United States has built ISIS or not, but I do know that all of a sudden it's like we're trying to rub shoulders with our former enemy, Iran. Dangerous, folks. Really, super, super dangerous. And Iran is going to become our buddy, and you know we're going to partner up with them to do what? I mean, it's to me, it's weird and dangerous. I have no idea which turn it's going to take.
I think it's against Saudi Arabia. All of the hijackers in 9/11 were Saudi. The Saudis are like our biggest ally. But they're doing the exact same thing that ISIS does, beheading people, murdering people. It's really weird.
And the Saudis, yeah, well, again, you hit it right on the head. It reminds me of the fights we had when I was a kid with the Mafia. On the one hand, the Mafia were friends of President Roosevelt, most of our presidents since. And yet the Kennedy brothers, one of the two Kennedy brothers, particularly Robert, went after them tooth and nail, went after them hard, super hard. And of course, both of them got shot in the back of the head. Yeah. I mean, and we still don't know the truth behind who did it. I mean, hey, I'm not glad that they got shot in the back of the head. I am glad they went after the Mafia. I mean, somebody should have, but nobody would do it. And well, the Mafia supposedly had ties to Italy. The Kennedy brothers had ties to Italy. I mean, folk, it becomes weird as to how these things intertwine. And maybe Robert Kennedy did not know that by going after the Mafia, he was going against his own father, who might have been a close friend of the Mafia himself. This has been suspected. Roosevelt used the Mafia to fight the Germans. Yes?
Kennedy's got their money from bootleg.
Huh?
Kennedy's got their money from bootleg.
Their father, yeah, got his money from bootlegging. That's right, yeah. But again, with possible support and help from possibly the Mafia. But we don't know that for sure. The bootlegging part, yeah, we're pretty well convinced of that. But underneath, who was covering up for him while he bootlegged and seeing to it that the judges were bought off? I mean, if they were bought off. Who was seeing that the cops were kept quiet? You know, the cops were let alone. I mean, again, if they were. And again, there are all kinds of books about it, that the cops were bought off, the cops were intimidated and told to keep quiet while Kennedy made his millions bootlegging. And the Mafia might have been involved. Then along came the son and went after the Mafia tooth and claw, and the father had to give consent to the death of both of his sons through the Mafia. I don't know how true that is, folk, but I mean, I'm telling you, in this strange world we're living in, it could be. Again, it's like a point I was making earlier. They don't believe in gambling, yet they're the most notorious people who run gambling casinos in that part of the world. I mean, it reminds me of when I was a kid, a lot of the people I grew up with did not believe in smoking tobacco. And yet, how they make their money? They found out the only crop they could grow to make cash, quick cash, easy cash on, enough cash to balance their budget, was tobacco. So they would grow tobacco and sell it to market. Oh no, I wouldn't use this myself, but then again, somebody's going to use it if I don't. So they grow tobacco. Now today it's not as big a cash crop as it was because a much lower percentage of people smoked. 40, 50 years ago, a much higher percentage of people smoked. And tobacco was a cash crop, and a lot of people who didn't believe in using it and smoking it would grow it. Strange world we're living in sometimes. In other words, the point I hope I want to make is, folk, we thought we could negotiate with the Russians, and that's who my friend had in mind a lot when talked about how to negotiate, but also on a personal note. For you women, if you ever marry an abuser, don't try to resolve your differences. You won't, you can't. With an abuser, there's only two things you can do. If they have a legal issue, have the brute arrested. Otherwise, leave the brute or do both. If you're in a relationship, whether you're male or female, with someone who's an abuser, and some abusers are women, there's only one thing you can do: learn to get out, leave. Don't try. This friend of mine would advise you need to try to resolve your differences. With an abuser, you can't do that. Can't be done. I could give you a case after case, including my own personal life. And where I would try to think, if we could just sit down and talk things over. No, you can't. It's the same reason this person is abused in the first place, the same reason the person is going to continue, and they're not going to quit until you're gone. Maybe they'll regret it sometime, but you've got to leave. All right. Now, something else about the mentality of these people. You catch one of them trying to blow you up, so you shoot him dead. Who's the bad guy? You or the person who is trying to blow you up? In the eyes of these people, who's the bad guy? Not the person who was trying to blow you up. He was the good guy. You are the bad guy. In dealing with them, the person who's against them is always in the wrong. We went after and killed Osama bin Laden. Well, because we did that, we're bad. They're going to get us for it. And I've heard that one of the reasons, folks, that Osama bin Laden came after us was that on holy Arabic soil and in the land of Arabia, they do not have churches. But folk, you just can't send men into combat without allowing some of them at least to go through a religious service first. And most of the American servicemen were nominally at least Christian. So we allowed them to set up chapels and had chaplains with crosses. This is contrary to Islamic law. And guess what? We were trying to defend Arabia from Saddam Hussein. So we went in with our army. When our army was big enough, strong enough, and capable of defending them, we went in our army, and our army consisted of a whole lot of Christians. And especially in time of combat, some of them became very religious. Very. Not that it lasted when combat was over, but... And we conducted Christian services on holy Arabian soil. So guess what? They felt like we have to go after them and punish them because they conducted a Christian service on holy Arabian soil. In my way of thinking, we should have told Saddam Hussein you could have them. Anyway, this is a topic that you are always in the wrong in their eyes. If you defend yourself, again, you're in the wrong. And again, they spend more time fighting each other. Now, here is the problem. That right now we have fighting them. The biggest, to me, the number one reason why we're not going to be able to defeat them anytime soon is a thing called political correctness. We are so super afraid of not being appearing to be the nice guy. Now, folk, I want to tell you something. When we fought World War II, we fought somewhat dirty. President Roosevelt never instructed our bombers, make sure you don't kill any civilians. Let's just go in and bomb, but bomb only military targets. But don't take out civilians. Well, he never did. We took out numerous civilians. Now, we're trying to fight a clean war, but I want to tell you something, folks, about how dirty war actually is. During World War II, Great Britain broke the German code. Hey, that's great. They knew where the Germans were and how many of them there were and where they're going to hit. Yeah. But one day, the British intelligence learned that Germany was going to bomb a certain town in England. Winston Churchill decided not to warn the residents of that town. A bunch of people were killed. Why did he not warn them? If he'd have warned them, he'd have let the Germans know that, hey, we've got your code. Then the Germans would have changed their code, and we don't have their code anymore. So we allowed the town to be bombed. Now, one of the girls in the Muslim one fast here really shocked that I said that. Folk, I've got something to tell you. That is war. Purely insanity. Now later, when this was found out, in about 1990, a bunch of British were, you let my uncle die, you let my cousin die, and didn't warn him. War is dirty. War kills innocent people. And if you try to fight it clean, you are going to lose. Now, if you think I feel uncomfortable saying that, you are right. If you don't like what I just said, I don't like what I just said. But when we dropped the bombs, the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, about 140,000 mostly innocent civilians were killed. From that day to this, the Japanese have been our buddies. They decided, well, we can't fight this. They were fighting. 2 million lives at least were saved. 1 million American servicemen and 1 million Japanese servicemen. And today we're so moral that we decide this bombing of the dropping of is immoral. It shouldn't have been done. Yeah, and we could be fighting to this day. All right, hey, anybody have any comments? I mean, if you think I'm saying some shocking things, I meant to. We're going to lose. Now, there's one reason now why we might win, folks. The same reason that the Islamists always lost. They spend so much of their time fighting each other, they might finish each other off before they can get around to working with us. Yeah, that's one reason that they might lose. Not that we'll win, it's just that they'll lose, yeah.
Are you saying we're going to lose to some Islamic war?
Yeah, it seems impossible. We have all these weapons, it seems impossible. But, remind you, Cortez with 200 men took care of Montezuma's army of 100,000 men. I told you how he did it, but how can it happen? Well, number one is if a bunch of us decide we're not going to fight. Number two, the way we're fighting a war where it goes on and on and on and on and on and then on and then on. I mean, World War II was over with after we got in 3 years. We got World War I over with in about 7 months once we got in it. But then we went to Vietnam, and it lasted some 12 years, and we quit and we lost.
Vietnam was a lot longer than 12 years, but
not much, but some longer.
Yeah. Like one of the reasons it went on is a similar reason that things were going on in Iraq for such a long time is the soldiers weren't allowed to cross a certain point, and they could only fire if fired upon.
Rules of engagement. We have such rules of engagement that are so tightly binding our troops that they can't function.
Yeah, it's really weird. But like a war with the Islamic people or whatever, it's not really a war of like the people versus Islam. Because there's plenty of peaceful Islam, and there's plenty of crazy Christianity, like the Lord's Resistance Army in Africa. They kill kids, they kill women and children, behead people, all in the name of Jesus Christ. So there's like a lot of extremism is an issue, but I don't think that there's any like, this massive war versus a mentality, and that we're like quote unquote going to lose anything. I think that the Middle East it's known as the land of the unruly. It's been known for that, or as that.
The land of what?
The land of the unruly.
Yeah.
It's been known as that since like the 1400s, 1300s, something like that, ages ago, like before the Crusades.
Yeah.
The Crusades
were 1095.
Yeah. So there,
land of the unruly.
And that's the whole idea of the Crusades was to try and go there and establish like a colony in this place to try and clean it up in a sense.
Yeah.
And it just didn't work out. Especially at the time. How are you going to bring horses to the desert? It just doesn't work.
Well, and after the Crusades were over and Europe had recovered somewhat from the Black Death, almost every Islamic nation was conquered, but we couldn't control them.
I don't think that there's any need to even be there fighting these people. So I don't think there's going to be a win or a loss. It's just going to be these people are going to continue to be tribal people until such a time that an age of information happens for them. And that's one of the biggest things that Google's trying to do now is create a wireless internet with weather balloons that covers the entire Earth. So everybody will have internet, everybody will have information. one of the biggest problems with that area is they're taught by, it's tribes, and there's like a chief, so to speak, and the chief teaches everybody. Nobody really knows how to read or write. They just know what this guy is telling them. You know, cell phones are trickling down. They're starting to gain technology. So if they have technology, if they have a free open internet, they can then read their own information, provided they can learn how to read. And then maybe the area will clean up. But I don't think there's this war that anybody's going to lose. It's just people are going to stop messing with the area and let them be. We don't need the oil anymore.
That might be, that's what we did for hundreds of years. Then came the oil.
Yeah.
And the oil got them entangled with the rest of the world. But for a long time, we realized we couldn't handle it, so we just ignored them. We turned about 50 years ago. I mean, this class appears to be just like, to get an 8:30 in the morning class to be attentive is something. But the last two lessons, they've been wide awake and attentive because of Islam. Now, 50 years ago, for teaching up and teaching about Islam, we put the class to sleep. Today, it's much more, right in the here and now, it's much more relevant. I hate to use that word relevant, but it's the best word. It's much more up to date. But if we could just turn it back, some of them kill each other. That might be partially a solution. Some of them will catch wise and say, hey, we've got to join the human race. And some of them won't. But again, it's the old thing when Cortez saw a bunch of people being Indian and sacrificed and just sit there and let it happen. Oh, that's their problem. Where do you move in? I mean, Saddam Hussein killed 1 million of his own people. Should we have moved in or we didn't? We let him go. And next, though, we went after Kuwait, and whoops, we don't allow that, so the whole world came down on it. But the thing about it is, though, I really believe that if we just sit there and let them, they're going to get so big one of these days that we can't handle them. All it would take, now, I'm going to jump back to the time we were talking about. At that back, there was a leader named Saladin. S-A-L, Saladin. Here's why I remember him. This man's name might be on the test, so I mean, some of the stuff has been detailed. But during the First Crusade, the Crusaders caught the Arab world by surprise, and they went in and they took the city of Jerusalem, set up a kingdom that lasted 100 years. Well, 100 years later, Saladin came along, and he did something that it hasn't been done in my lifetime, but that rarely has been done since Muhammad. He united all that part of Islam under his rule. And with that, he was able to drive out the Crusaders. And the Crusaders were never able, at least during the Crusading period, to recapture Jerusalem. Now, Saladin made news again in 1990 because Saddam Hussein claimed that he really liked two people, Nebuchadnezzar, who we talked about, and Saladin. He claimed we descended from both men. He claimed, oh yeah, I look like those men, and if you look at their pictures, I didn't see the resemblance, but nevertheless, he claimed that he looked like Nebuchadnezzar and he looked like Saladin. And what really enamored him were both Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem. And guess what? Saladin also conquered Jerusalem. Both men had this one thing in common. They had defeated, in the case of Nebuchadnezzar, he had defeated the Jews. In the case of Saladin, he defeated the Christians. But if they could get a leader who they all would like, who would claim to be like the 12th Imam. Did I talk about the 12 Imams in here? Okay, I'm seeing a few heads nodding. If the 12th Imam, like would someone appear on the scene who would claim that he's the 12th Imam? Imam number 12 supposedly disappeared and is being hidden away for hundreds of years. When he comes back, he's going to unite all of Islam. If they could unite, we'd be forced into a war, purely and simply. Because in the modern world, I mean, you know, we can't turn our backs to them like we did 150, 200, 300 years ago. We simply, and leave them alone. We simply can't. There's too many of them living in Europe, too many of them living in South America. And folks, there's rumors going around that they even come to our American mosque and secretly inside of the mosque they plot the overthrow of the United States. This is rumor. You don't have to believe it. I can't prove it. But these stories are in fact told. And they get in their mosques in Europe and plot the overthrow. In the case of Europe, they have the attitude that since they once had part of Spain, Spain is still there. Any area that they once had, they still had, they always claimed. That's why they hate the Jews being in Israel, because say Israel was once ours, so they always have it. Spain was once theirs, they always will claim it. But they have moved into Europe in droves, and they will not mix in and blend in with the European population or take any interest in European affairs. All right, now, there are stories going around, folk, that in American public schools, they are teaching the young people Muslim prayers. I don't know how true it is, but I have heard those stories. If you'd ask me the name, what specifically?
There's a school in New York like a week.
What's that?
There's a school in New York for like a week, and then they stopped.
They stopped it?
Yeah, they were making them say
Okay,
that the
but something though I understand has not stopped. All of you probably know that prayer rooms are illegal in public schools. You might not know that they are legal if they are Muslim prayer rooms. In New York, and if you want to verify this, I mean, all right, my wife, one of my pupils one time, my wife was shopping, somehow or another this person noticed that my wife's name was Cunningham. So he said, oh, are you related to, yeah, oh yeah. He said, I had Mr. Cunningham in class, and we didn't leave before he told us that they have Muslim prayer rooms in public schools. So I went home and I looked it up, and sure enough, if you look up, folks, internet, Muslim prayer rooms, public schools, it is there. The ACLU never says a word against it. And when I say, now this is big taxpayer money, I'll tell you why. For the Muslim prayer room, number one, they're exclusively available only to Muslims. They have to put down special carpet that costs taxpayers hundreds of tens of thousands of dollars. They have to be plumbed because Muslim people wash their hands and feet before they pray, and they must have something to tell them this Mecca is this way, and they have to be pointed toward Mecca, and they have to have all kinds of Islamic Arabic symbols to them. And I said rooms plural. They have to have two of them. The men and women worship in separate rooms. All this is at the taxpayer expense to the tune of thousands, tens of thousands of dollars everywhere they put it, and nobody at all utters a word of protest. Again, look it up. Don't just take my word for it. It's there. Most people seem to be somewhat unaware that it's happening, but nevertheless, it is going on. And of course, there are places where that Muslim cashiers or supermarkets are told you don't have to wait on a customer who's checking out pork. This supposedly is going on also. And some Muslim women have tried to get a driver's license with their face covered, but every Western court has ruled against them, that religion or religion, to take your picture for a driver, you must uncover your face long enough to have your picture made, because we can't recognize you behind the veil. And also, we can't allow you to drive behind the veil either. You must at least remove that veil long enough to drive. But notice that there's a lot of ways where their religion is coming into conflict with Western ideas, Western morality. Again, the ACLU, which would do anything in the world to stop any type of Christian expression, never says a word against any type of Islamic expression. In fact, the only religion in this country that is an illegal religion is Christianity. The others, well, that shows tolerance. We have to be tolerant. They're not tolerant toward us and never will be. All right. Now, just by way of a quick review, who knows which group of people invented algebra? It was the Arabs. Which group of people? I mean, there was an Iranian who invented algebra, and I can't think his name. At one time, folk, they were far ahead. In fact, if you could go back in time to the year 1000, visit the year 1000, you would be hard put to determine who is the most advanced people on the face of the earth at the time. It would either toss up between Islam on the one hand and China on the other. The Chinese, very advanced. Islam, they were advanced in the fields of medicine, astronomy, mathematics. These fields, with the advances these fields should have. Now, you might wonder, how is astronomy important? The science of astronomy is what led the way towards Europeans shooting ahead, they first had to make reforms in astronomy. They had to get in their mind that the Earth actually revolved around the sun, and the Earth turns on its axis every day. And the Earth is just one of the planets, along with the other planets that they knew about. They had to eventually get these things in their mind before they could seemingly advance. But astronomy led the way. Well, in the 1100s, 1000s, 1100s, the Arabs were far ahead. But they quit advancing. And the result was these Europeans who had been pretty drastically far behind wound up forging ahead. All right. Oh yes, I think I mentioned about the Crusades. Well, before the Crusades, when the Muslims took over southern Spain, they met a leader in France who stopped them. Did I mention that, the Battle of Tours, and the leader, Charles Martel? If not, I'll make sure I mention it now. The leader's name who stopped their advance was Charles Martel. And the battle was the Battle of Tours. Many years ago, some author wrote, I guess it was 7 or 8 years ago, an author wrote a best-selling book called The 10 Most Decisive Battles of World History. And the Battle of Tours was in that book. Battle of Tours, where the mayor of the palace, the prime minister of France, not the king, met the Muslims right here around the border of France and Spain, defeated them, and eventually then the Christians were encouraged to, hey, we can fight these people, we can win. And they fought a long war with Spain. I mean, Spain fought a long war against them. It took the Spanish some 700 years to drive them out of Spain. The year they finally did it was 1492, and that was the same year. In fact, Ferdinand and Isabella would not even consider helping Columbus until the last of the Moors were driven out of Spain. They were driven out in the summer of 1492, so Columbus was given us 3 ships, which he had ready to sail in August. And on October 12, 1492, he landed in Ireland. But by that time, they had driven all the Muslims out of Spain. We can criticize them for it, but folk were about to figure out, in a lot of cases, why our ancestors behaved the way they did. These people, I'm going to talk about the terrorists now, not all of Islam, but the terrorists, have taken us back to the 6th and 7th centuries as far as mental, not our mentality, but theirs. It's like all of a sudden the 7th century mindset is coming to visit us in the 21st century. And they're teaching us something about what life was like in the 7th century, where the religion was coerced and forced upon you, or that people fought you for over religious reasons. It's like it's coming back again. And all of a sudden we can criticize Queen Isabella for driving out the Moors, but we're beginning to understand, hey, maybe she didn't know anything else she could do. Was there another solution? I mean, it's like my friend used to talk about, you've got to find a third alternative. But when someone wants to see you dead, there is no either you're dead or you live. There's no in-betweens. There's no third alternative. It's one or the other. Well, and you know, hopefully some of you know something about digital computers. A digital computer is called because every digit in it is either 1 or it's 0. It's air or int. And there's no in-between states. Now, when they first got the computers, they had the analog computer. And everybody thought, oh, you know, there's such a thing as in-between states. And with the analog computer, well, guess what? Most have never heard of analog computers, never seen one. They went by the wayside fast and it was found that the only type of computer that works is digital. And a digital computer is 1 and 0, or 0 and 1. There's no in-between states. It's all or it's none. If it's not all, it's none. If it's not none, it's all. And they are changing our minds. Or going, now, eventually, they haven't yet, but they're eventually going to change our minds about a whole lot of things, folks. And again, one of the reasons we're going to have a difficult time with it is our own political correctness. Now, these people a few years ago, when most of you were really small children, were going around Israel, and every 3 or 4 months, one of them would just go himself to kingdom come. At first, it was only men. Then they decided to let women. And now, folks, I want to interrupt myself here about women. It is known that Muhammad did not even believe that women had a soul. Therefore, women did not go to paradise. And you might ask, what about the 70 virgins? Oh, they were not earth women. They were just women whom God created just for the men who deserved to be in paradise. The men maybe who had died in the Holy War. You get, I mean, some people say 70 and some 72. I don't know which number is correct. It's either 70 or 72 virgins that they have waiting for them on the other side of paradise. But now, then the Palestinians started using women because they figured nobody was suspected. So Israel finally, after they put up with several of these bombings, they put these people, the Muslims, in fenced areas, basically in cages. And some of you might have seen the fences are about 9 feet tall with a whole lot of glass, broken glass and barbed wire on top. And then, of course, they watch them day and night to make sure nobody gets out, except you can get out through the gate. When you get out through the gate, you go through all kinds of bomb-sniffing dogs and all kinds of gunpowder detecting equipment. And the suicide bombings have completely stopped in Israel. Now, folks, these people sued in the world court as a violation of their rights. The world court, being the liberal court it is, ruled in their favor. Israel said, you people aren't being blown up by them like we are. We're not going to let them out. And they're still there. Have any of you heard of this outside of class? One of you is shaking your head a little bit. Most of you have, well, you've heard of it now. It's politically incorrect. It's putting people away just for their ethnicity. It's against our own Constitution. But folk, during World War II, we put the Japanese in camps only because they were Japanese. Today, we condemn ourselves for it. But guess what? We won the war. And today, we condemn it. But I'll tell you something. They have a different. Every American living at the time knew the Japanese were in camps. And some Americans say, hey, let's go around and collect coats to make sure these people don't get cold during the night. Or let's make sure, every American knew they were there, and some Americans actually tried to assist them. But no American called for their release. Not one. Not even the communists called for their release. The communists, of course, were on our side. Earl Warren, who later became such a liberal chief, was in charge of keeping them in the camps. He saw nothing wrong with the morality of it. Not one person living in 1942 had any objection to putting these people in camp. Today, we have a different mindset. But I think our political correctness is going to cost us. They're going to have to throw a few really dirty bombs at us before we realize, hey, we can't fight with the confines shackling our troops. I mean, I'll tell you something about our troops, folks. Something that I've never seen happen. They're coming home with their minds. Not just, I mean, of course, we've all would feature men coming home with legs and arms missing or, with a brain down. I'm talking about persons who never had a bullet hit them, never were hurt, but they're coming home with their minds all that stuff. And I can understand why. Believe me, I think I can. Not because I ever was in combat. This may sound strange if you want to laugh, go ahead, but because I spent 5.5 years as a public school teacher. And as public school teachers today suffer from what's called combat fatigue. It's a low self-image, sleeplessness, depression, worthlessness. Because you're dealing with a bunch of bad kids that you're told you must control, but you're not allowed to. But for the frontline troops, it'd be worse, where you see the enemy, you know he's the enemy, you know he's going to blow you up, you're not allowed to take him out without violating some rules of engagement. There were no rules of engagement for our troops in World War II. President Roosevelt never told his soldiers, don't kill innocent civilians. And that was the last big war we fought that we won. And since then, we fought to a stalemate in Korea. We lost in Vietnam. And these wars that we're fighting now, they just keep on going on and 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 on. I had a pupil ask me one time, how long has this war been going on? I said, 1,400 years. I might have said that in my class. 1,400 years. Since Muhammad. All right. I've gotten it off my chest somewhat. Now, let's see. Is there anything else now that I'll think of quite a bit to say once I get on my way home? Oh yeah, by way of review. Well, the Muslim holy war is called a, you'll hear this in the news a lot. They call it, what do they call a Muslim holy war? Jihad. A jihad. Persons who die in a jihad are promised 70 virgins. Now, I'll give you a story. I mean, this happened during the Crusades. There was a man who lived in a hill in what is today Israel, called the Old Man on a Mountain. The Old Man on a Mountain led a cult called the Cult of the Assassins, in which we get our word assassination. And he would go out and try to assassinate everybody who disagreed with him, whether it be Christian crusader or Muslim ruler. Finally, one of the Muslim rulers rose up and sent him to Italy. Sent him off to India. He died in India. But here's how he did his young boys. He'd look around the community and see for some hopelessly impoverished young boy, usually an orphan. They had a lot of orphans in those days. He'd tell them to get this young boy and bring him into his camp. And he had a place prepared that looked like a Garden of Eden. Oh, just a plush, plush garden. And he'd be tended to and waited on by some really, really beautiful young girls. He'd be told, now, this is paradise. And you'll be coming here forever if you'll just simply, now, I want you to go, this King of England over here, Edward I, go kill him. I know you're going to get killed in the process. He's got a lot of bodyguards around, but you can just simply look like a poor boy, and at the last minute, pull out your dagger and stab him. They tried, they never got Edward, by the way. He escaped himself. They actually tried to drop a rock on him when his head was down, but he happened at the last minute to move to one side, supposedly unaware, and the rock fell down beside him. These young boys would be willing to go off because they had no hope in this life, commit suicide in an attempted assassination, which they often pull off. This is the way that they have been doing from that time till this, convincing other people, a lot of them hopelessly impoverished. You die in a jihad, you're promised paradise with all these dainty, beautiful things that we have for you. All right, now the Hijra, H-I-G-I-R-A. What is the significance of it? And you'll remember from the other lesson. This is the time that Mohammedans keep their calendar from. They mark the calendar. It marks the time when Mohammed fled Mecca and went to Medina. They call it the Hijra. Hijra, I believe your book gives two different pronunciations of it. H-I-J-R-A, the flight. And they keep their calendar by it. All right. When Muhammad died, I don't expect to remember his name, but who took over? I mean, anybody recall anything else about who took over when he died? He was his what?
His best friend.
Not his best friend so much as it was his uncle. Abu Bakr was his name. His uncle took over. His uncle only lived a couple years and he died. And Islam split. They split between Sunni and Shiite over what issue? Oh, this is, it looks like you're paying attention, but this is review. What's that? The issue is who was to be the leader. Was it going to be Muhammad's immediate family or his cousins? You know, was it going to be his direct descendants or his cousins? But basically, who was to be the leader? What is the name that the Islamic people give to their God? Allah. When I was a kid, our teachers used to pronounce it Allah. but or even Allah. But now they pronounce, I believe the correct pronunciation is known to be Allah. They have a holy month. This holy month is called what? Ramadan. And folks, these words I'm giving to you now, you will hear if you listen to the news at all. Maybe most of you don't. But you'll hear, or if you read the newspapers, and again, maybe most of you don't, but you'll see these words. And from time to time, again, nobody paid any attention to it when I was younger. Today we do. I told you not to worry about the Umayyads and Abbasids. The one thing, well, no, nothing. We'll mention, that both of them had problems when their leaders got rich. The leaders often resorted to drinking and keeping large harems with many wives, and this helped foster rebellion when they felt like, hey, if the leaders can do it. How many wives is an Islamic man allowed to have? 4. How many husbands is an Islamic woman allowed to have? 1. Islamic women are among the most restricted on the face of the earth, and folk, again, it's hard to explain how liberals who are so concerned about women's rights can be so seemingly indifferent when they hear about Islamic women being treated as property, their bodies mutilated to try to make sure they don't commit adultery. Not even allowed to get a driver's license, not even allowed to learn to read in a lot of cases. Now, there are exceptions. What does Sharia law, and this is something that I do not in any way advocate, but I think I'm going to ask it because I've not mentioned it, but I'm going to mention it now. What does Sharia law say should be done to homosexuals? Anybody know Sharia law? They should be killed. I mean, this is Sharia law. Now, understand, this is not me. Sharia law teaches that homosexuals should be killed, and every once in a while it makes world news. One of them is. Women who commit adultery under Sharia law are what? Generally stoned to death. Now, again, in the modern world, they have a difficult time with this because as soon as they start planning to stone a woman, the world press might get up and take it up. And I mean, there's a woman who was converted to Christianity in Egypt, and this really got a bunch of them riled up, and they were wanting to kill her. Eventually, the world press persuaded some of them to let her go to a country where the Christianity is still legal. When Islam first went out of Arabia, they met, the first people they conquered was a certain empire. Does anybody know which empire it was? Anybody remember? It was the Persian Empire. And the reason they had an easy time conquering was the Persian Empire had been weakened by centuries-long conflict between them and the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire was what was left of the old Roman Empire. The Byzantines and Persians almost finished each other off. The Byzantines, they weakened each other. Then out came Islam, and they conquered Persia. All right, the Turks. Where were the Turks originally from? Anybody remember? Were originally from? I don't know. Mongolia. Hey, excellent, excellent. One of you know it. The Turks were originally from Mongolia. And they would have destroyed Islam, except that they converted to Islam themselves. Now, the Turks made this long, long trip. The nation of Turkey today is named after them. But they took over this region and named it Turkey. Eventually, they destroyed the Byzantine Empire, but it took hundreds of years. Oh yes, I must mention their literature. I don't think I have in this class. Their most famous literature story about Arabian Nights And one of the famous stories that used to appear in every elementary and high school reader was Aladdin and the Magic Lamp. Another one of the stories, Alabama and the 40 Thieves. Do any of you know what I'm talking about? Aladdin and the Magic Lamp, if you rub that lamp, your wish would come true. 40 Thieves, where the way to get into the cave was to say, "Open sesame," and the cave would open up. Anyway, their literature, with all due respect, was really high quality literature for the time. But again, this was around the year AD 1000 when they were at the peak of their power intellectually. And then their religion came into conflict with science, or seemed to. I mean, not that it actually did, but it seemed to. And that created a big problem for them. And then they got to fighting among themselves and destroying everything that they built, with the result that Western Europeans began to develop better weaponry, better guns, and eventually every Muslim country was conquered. And after World War II, European nations turned them loose, feeling like we can't deal with them, we can't change them, there's nothing we can do to help them, let them go, we don't want to take responsibility for them. And they turned them loose. The Holy Book of Islam is a book called the Quran. In my day, it was spelled Koran, but say in my day, I mean, yes, I'm now an old man. Yeah, when I was young, but now it's called Quran. And I had a pupil in the morning class try to tell me the word caliph was spelled with a K. I've seen it spelled that way, folks, but your book spelled it with a C. Personally, as long as you spell it right, otherwise I don't care how you spell it, C or K. If you want to spell it, you need to spell the word. All Muslims, if at all possible, are expected to go to what town once a year? What city? They all try to go there at least once a year. Once in their lifetime. Mecca. They try to go to Mecca, not once a year, my bad. Once in their lifetime, if at all possible, they try to make a pilgrimage to Mecca and worship around a stone. The stone is called the Kaaba. Yeah, your book spells with two words, K-A, accent, A-B-A, yeah, Kaaba. The city of Jerusalem is sacred to three religions. I'll name them: Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And all three vie for it. And it's been a hot spot. And of course, if you look on a map, Jerusalem is located like at a strategic, well, right here. It's near where Africa, Asia, and Europe come together. So that in some ways it's like a crossroads for the world's three biggest continents. And in fact, at one time, if you put North and South America together like they once were, Jerusalem becomes the center of the world's landmass. Separate the continents, and Jerusalem is slightly on the edge, but again, put these continents together, put all the continents, and Jerusalem becomes like the center of the world's landmass. So again, it's important. Whoever controls Jerusalem might someday control the world. All right. Before I leave, I want to make sure I have not forgotten anything. Oh yeah, the next lesson will be on, somebody asked me if we was going to review next. I know next lesson will be on Africa. And it might be somewhat difficult to make that as interesting, but I'm going to make every attempt to. Oh yes, when you talk about what nations the Arabs conquered, if you have a multiple choice question, and you see, and I ask what nations will Arabs conquer, if you see Egypt, that might be a choice. If you see Libya, yeah, we might go for that one. If you see Italy, folk, pick another choice. If you see Spain, yeah, they had much of Spain. If you see France, pick another choice. If you see Great Britain, Go for something else. Turkey, yeah, might be them. They've had all the way from Pakistan, all this part of the world here, and at one time they made inroads into the Balkan region and into southern Spain. They were eventually driven out of Europe. They were driven out of Sicily. But then they still control North Africa. Everywhere they're in control, they have a tendency for the rich to be extremely, extremely, extremely rich, and 99% of them to be poor in hopeless poverty. That's changing a little bit, but the rich are very, very rich, the poor are very, very poor. Kuwait is an exception. And most of them then have no chance to go from one social class to another, or no chance to better themselves, because there's no gradual way you can climb. The rich are permanently rich, the poor are permanently poor, with hardly anybody in between. All right. 1 minute for questions, comments. Again, most of you look like you've been awake and attentive. I do appreciate it. And if you think these last 2 lessons have been hard on me, difficult for me, you are right. It's very difficult when we talk about this subject, and in some ways I'll be glad to move on to a different topic. I'll see you on Wednesday.